All right, everybody, welcome back to the next part of our discussion. And this is going to be all, I would label my notes now, economic systems. And as a quick refresher from the last segment, we have three basic economic questions. We have what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Okay? And depending on how, as a society, as a culture, as a country, however you want to label it, or even as an individual business, but primarily at a macro level, we're talking countries or cultures now, depending on how we answer these questions, determine the type of system that we will have in place. And for economists, there are four primary types of systems that we will talk about. There will be slight derivations of the four, but there's four primary models that we're going to take a look at and how they developed and how they operate and what they really mean. Okay? The first type of economic system is referred to as the traditional system. Now again, the type of system you have really is reflective on how you answer the question. So the traditional economy, which starts really from the basic economic organizations of cultures, which for all intents and purposes start primarily way back with the great agricultural civilizations of Mesopotamia, going all the way for several thousand years after that, answer economic questions this way. What to produce? Okay? And if I were doing this, I'd make a little grid of the different systems and how they answer the questions, because that's a really easy way to remember how to do this, or how to understand these different concepts. So, in the traditional economy, what to produce? Here's your answer. Same thing we always produced. That was easy, right? Pretty straightforward answer. How to produce? Same way we always did. And for whom to produce? You guessed it, same people we always did. Now, does this answer the three economic questions? And the answer clearly is yes, it does. So that's fine. So it is, in effect, answering the question. So it is a system. And this system, by the way, worked for thousands of years. No problem with it. Except for one itty-bitty problem. What's the slight problem with the traditional economy? Anybody got any thoughts? Usually at this point in the live class, excuse me, a lot of people tell me some interesting things that are wrong with this one, with this economic system. There's one in particular. The problem is this system is not very adaptable to what? And the answer is obvious, it's change. Well, so what? Why is change such a good thing? Well, one of the problems with the traditional economy is this. If resources are scarce, we should use them wisely, right? That's a pretty sound economic principle. And let's say we have somebody in our culture who has an IQ of like 190, the smartest person on the planet, okay? Is intelligence a scarce resource? Yes. Abundantly yes. So, what do you want to do with the guy with the IQ of 190? Okay. However, in our economic system, his grandfather was a garbage man, which meant his dad was probably a garbage man. So, pretty much, what's the guy with the 190 IQ in all likelihood in our system going to be doing? Yeah, probably picking up trash. Intelligently, I'm sure. Is that a good use of that resource? On the other hand, in our traditional economy, we have another guy who's an idiot. He's a moron. He drools. He can't even tie his shoes. However, his grandfather was the king, which, as you know, meant his daddy was the king, which means the drooling idiot will be king. So in this system, it's possible that you can have the really smart guy picking up the garbage and the really dumb guy making all the rules. Is that a good way to run a system? The system has some inherent flaws. It's inability to adapt to changing circumstances, changing talents, changing conditions, make it a pretty fragile system some of the time. But, as I mentioned, this system pervades and is relatively successful for thousands of years. Until it happens. One of the greatest events in human history. An event of such earth-shattering importance that empires would shake from it, nations would rise and fall, it forever fundamentally re-altered the order of the planet. And yet, we don't get a holiday for it. We don't get a day off of school. No one's even sure exactly when it happened. They're precisely sure where. But what event fundamentally reorders the world and makes the traditional economy no longer relevant? There are no, or very few, unless what we would term primitive societies that have traditional economies. The event is, and I'm sure you studied in high school, at least tangentially, is the Industrial Revolution. Why was the Industrial Revolution such a big deal? The Industrial Revolution was a big deal for this reason. It did something kind of unprecedented in human history before. It dramatically increased wealth. If you look at wealth primarily throughout human history, wealth is simply transfer. You conquer my country, you take my stuff. Somebody conquers you, they take your stuff, our stuff. Okay? But wealth just moves around. So if you looked at overall the creation of wealth, and it goes a little bit, but it's not a big increase. But then, when the industrial age happens, it kind of does this. It kind of takes off. Wealth, on a massive, on an unprecedented scale, is created. And that required new answers, new theories, new ideas. And this is an age of, as I said, unprecedented wealth growth. It's the age of the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, people like that. If you have ever seen, and I don't know if I can find it on YouTube. If I do, I'll upload it. There was a special on the History Channel called The Men Who Built America. And it talks about the development of Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, some of the great what were called robber barons of that early industrial age era. Absolutely fascinating understanding of the growth of this new type of economic system, and what it did, and how it's kind of learning the rules of it as it goes along. It's just a fascinating system. But the guy who we will primarily be talking about in relation to this new system, which we will label, number 2, the market economy, is the brainchild of a guy named Adam Smith. And you should know who Adam Smith is. You can take an economics class, everybody will talk about Adam Smith, and rightly so. Adam Smith, in the year 1776, it was a busy year. There was a minor revolution going on somewhere you might have heard about. Adam Smith, who was an English/Scottish economist, took the time to write a book he called Wealth of Nations. That's the short title. There's a longer title, but you can call it The Wealth of Nations. That's what everyone calls it. And in The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith has figured it out. Adam Smith says the traditional economy doesn't work. This new industrial age is predicated on all sorts of new and different ideas, new and different answers to these economic questions. And in the market economy, here are the new answers. What to produce. Now remember, in the traditional economy, we produce the same stuff we'd always been producing. Well, Adam Smith says that's not a good idea. Now, what to produce? Whatever you want. That's it. Whatever you want. No rules anymore, or very few rules. Produce what you want to produce. You don't want to be a garbage man? Don't be a garbage man. You don't want to brew beer? Don't brew beer. It's the second answer that's probably the most critical of the market model. How to produce. Adam Smith did not care what you made, but this word radiates throughout the market. Efficiency. I don't care what you make, just do it well. Make it efficient. Again, Smith realizes resources are scarce. All resources. So you better use them wisely. Okay? And this simple idea takes economics in a whole new direction. And it really allows the rise of modern capitalist economic systems, which produced mad amounts of wealth. Okay? So whatever you're going to do, be efficient. Finally, the last answer, for whom to produce? Well, whoever can afford it. Right? Who's going to keep the profit? The risk taker, the entrepreneur. I'm under no burden to share it with anybody. It's mine. I take the risk, I reap the reward, or the consequence, if the business fails. And so, with these three new answers to these same old questions, an entirely new economic system develops. The market. And this is an amazing thing. And Smith had some interesting other insights. And I think one of the other, it might be one of the essay questions this week on the quiz, talks about some of Smith's interesting concepts. One, he came up with a concept of what he called the invisible hand. Or hands. What's an invisible hand? Smith said invisible hands are market forces. And basically what Smith said is these market forces, which you don't see at work, magically drive an economy. And the essence of the invisible hand is simply this. It's greed. See, Adam Smith does not have a very, positive view of human beings. He thinks you are greedy, selfish little things that only do what's in your own self-interest. That's what motivates you. Greed. Greed for money, greed for wealth, greed for love, whatever you want to call it. And Smith says, you know what? Let's just tell it like it is. He says, that's fine. Because here's how it's going to work. Here's how the invisible hands play out. See, if we take one of my old ice cream stores, I used to own one in McKees Rocks, and we'll talk about that a lot next week when I'm talking about supply and demand. I am a producer of ice cream. Now, according to Adam Smith, I'm a greedy guy. Now, I would like to charge you $100 a cone if I could. If I could get away with it, trust me, I would, because I'm greedy, I'm selfish. So here's my invisible hand. I am driving the price of ice cream up. On the other hand, let's say you're a consumer of ice cream. Well, you're a greedy, selfish person too. You'd like to get it for free, or as little as possible. So you push the price down. And then somehow, magically, without anybody interfering, without anything, we both push until we hit a price. Am I thrilled? Like in McKees Rocks, that was $1.50 a cone. Am I thrilled at getting $1.50? No. Are you thrilled to pay $1.50? No. But are you okay with paying $1.50? Yes. Am I okay with selling for $1.50? Yes. And magically, that's how our system works. The markets, these send invisible signals. Like if I price my cones too high, there will be invisible signals. People just won't buy them. I'm like, oh, I better pull my hand back a little bit. And then consumers say, ooh, yes, now it's where we want it to be. And so in essence, that's how modern, at least early on, capitalist market-driven economies begin to operate. On these invisible hands, these invisible market forces and signals that send signals to consumers, signals to producers, and somehow we arrive at prices that clear the market, and everything works highly efficiently. Okay? And efficiency is key here. Once again, the market will also send other signals. Let's say you are an inefficient producer of ice cream cones. If you produce inefficiently, what does that do to the price of your product? If you are an inefficient producer, your price goes up because you're not as efficient with labor, you're not as efficient with resources and things like that, so your cost goes up. Now, assuming the ice cream cones are relatively equal and people can get them wherever they want, which is what Smith envisioned, lots of small firms competing. If all the other ice cream cones in McKees Rocks are $1.50, $1.50, $1.50, $1.50, and yours is $2, who will buy yours? The answer is no one. The market is sending you a signal. You are an inefficient producer. What should you do? According to Smith, get out. Go do something else. You are not efficient enough to be in that particular ball game, so you got to go somewhere else. Okay? So it is but again, it's a very cutthroat, very highly competitive system. Now, one of the advantages Smith thought would happen, and it doesn't historically play out this way. Smith thought that you would have something called consumer sovereignty, which meant the consumer would win. Because as all these businesses compete, price becomes the critical factor. And with price always being the critical factor, businesses are consistently trying to produce at a lower cost. Okay? So he thought the consumer in this market-driven economy would be king. Now, eventually that's going to happen, but not early on. And we'll talk more about that probably next week. Another term of Smith's you will need to know, in addition to the invisible hands, is something he referred to as this: laissez-faire. It's a French phrase. And it basically referred to what Smith thought the proper role of government should be in modern market-driven economies. See, in the traditional economy, a lot of that was predicated on whatever the kings, said we would do, and we just, hand it on down the line, we continue to do it. But, if all Smith cares about is efficiency, and really that is the mantra for the market economy, at least in Smith's vision of it, efficient, 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 efficient. Here's an easy question. How efficient is government? Most of us can agree that as an entity, government is horrifically inefficient. Anyone who doubts the efficiency of government needs only look at a PennDOT crew this spring when construction season hits here in western Pennsylvania. Then the entire efficiency of government will be laid bare for you. As you drive through massive amounts of cones, you will see 15 to 20 workers at a site. One will be operating a jackhammer. Then there's, of course, there's my dream job, the stop slow guys, relevant skills, wrist turning. Everyone else will be drinking coffee, reading Playboy magazines, or doing whatever it is else PennDOT workers do by the side of the road. But it is many things, but an efficient use of your tax dollars it is probably not. So, if government is inefficient, what is their role in an economic system that is predicated on efficiency? Laissez-faire, French, for leave it alone. Adam Smith would tell you basically the government's role should be to stay the hell out. You don't really have a major role here. The invisible hands, according to Smith, take care of it all. It works, he says. All you got to do is stay out, let the market do its magic, and everything will be fine. And it does appear early on that the market system does exactly what Smith envisioned it would do. And it created wealth. Lots of it. Again, as I mentioned, it's the era of the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, right? People creating massive wealth. But there was maybe it's a flaw. Some economists would argue it's not a flaw, it's what we should go back to. Some will say it is a huge flaw. But there is something that caused problems once the market system took hold and began to produce all this wealth. Okay? What's the flaw? What's the teeny-weeny, perhaps major flaw in the system? Well, it might be this. market system, as you know, is based on competition. Right? You compete. So, and that drives the cost down in theory. Everybody competing. Bad producers get out. Only efficient people that efficiently utilize resources are allowed to stay in this game. Competition. And competition's an interesting thing. Competition produces winners. Carnegies, Mellons, Rockefellers. But by its very definition, when you produce winners, you will also always produce what? You produce losers. There's your problem. Okay? You have losers. And there does appear to be too many, at least in the early stages of capitalism, an unequal distribution of all this cool wealth we're creating. And the example is somewhat personal to me. My three great-grandfathers worked at the Carnegie Steel Mill in Homestead. Okay? And working at steel mills in those days was highly hazardous work. You worked long hours, dangerous conditions. People died all the time. Not necessarily always in the plants, but from, exhaustion, from smoking, from pollution, from all that sort of stuff, right? Hazardous work. So, when my three great-grandfather would work in that mill, and he'd do his 10, 12-hour workday, right? He would walk home with about $6, $7. On that same day, Andrew Carnegie, who probably wasn't even there, he might have been golfing in Scotland, but his average daily take-home pay was about $750,000 a day. Some people would argue that, by the way, the person doing all the work in the mill is not Carnegie, or his personal hatchet man, Henry Clay Frick. It was the workers. So some said, this isn't right. There's got to be some new way we can figure this out. Okay? So onto the horizon will come one of the more influential economic, political thinkers of the modern era. Okay? I was watching a show on, I think it was A&E a while ago. It was called The 100 Most Important People of the Millennium. Wow. That'd look good on your resume. Adam Smith was on the list, certainly. I think he was like 14 or 17 or something like that. The next guy was 5. He was number 5 on that list. Huge influence. And he has all new answers to the market system. Who has new answers in a new system? And you should note his name. And we'll talk about him and give him some due credit before I kind of rip him apart. His name was Karl Marx. The unfunny Marx brother. All right, no one ever gets that. I'm just old. So anyway, Karl Marx is an economist, and he really sees the market economy and says, wow, this is not fair. This is way too much unequal. There's lots of wealth, right? A lot more wealth than we used to have. Why, excuse me. Why is it concentrated in the hands of so few? And he says, wouldn't it be better if instead of competing, because again, you got losers when you compete, why don't we all cooperate and work together for the greater good of us all, of mankind, etc., etc.? And wouldn't that be a better system? Well, we'll see. And basically, what Karl Marx comes up with, he has a new system too, the third one, referred to as a command economy. And what's a command economy? Well, what Marx is trying to figure out is a way out of this mess of unequal distribution of wealth. So he says, again, instead of competing, because again, those three economic questions in a market economy, what to produce? Ice cream cones in McKees Rocks. Guess who made that decision? I did. How to produce? To get a franchise through Tasty Freeze and open my store there. Okay, who made that decision? Once again, I did. And for whom to produce, keeping the profit, that was an easy one. I made that decision as well. So in market systems, decisions are made by individuals. And again, if Smith's right, and we're all greedy, selfish little souls, we're all trying to get over on one another, we have individuals making decisions in their own best interest, sometimes at the cost of other individuals. In fact, in many cases, at the cost of other individuals. And Marx doesn't like that. And so he wants to figure out a way that we can make decisions for the greater good. So it occurs to him, instead of individuals making these decisions, we need somebody to make the decisions who always has the best interest of the people at heart. And he wrestled with that for a while, and then finally it occurs to him, who has your best interest at heart? Who speaks for you? Who speaks for the people? And to Marx, invariably, came to the conclusion that the best answer would be government. Your elected, in theory, representatives could hopefully look beyond your own greedy selfishness and make decisions that are in the best interest of us collectively as a whole. And so that's what he thought we should do. So, in essence, the command economy works like this. What to produce? Whatever the government tells you. How to produce it? You guessed it, however the government says. And for whom to produce it? Well, the government will tell you who gets to keep all the money. It's probably not going to be you, though. And he introduces this system, command economy, which closely equates to the political philosophy of communism. So capitalism with the market economy, communism with the command economy. And in all fairness to Marx's command economy, he does a really good job of eliminating some of the abject poverty that characterizes the market economies of that age. And what's fascinating is you have two now fascinating, interesting political economic systems that are polar opposites of one another. In fact, they can't stand one another. One of the great challenges, though, is just as there may have been a flaw in Adam Smith's vision of pure, unrestrained capitalism, may have been, there is without question a big flaw in Marx's, in my view, in Marx's view of the command economy. What's the problem in the command economy? Well, the short answer is this: it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? See, fascinatingly, Karl Marx had this really nice, noble view of human beings. See, he basically thought human beings, if given half a chance, will work for the common good, will do what's in the interest of the greater totality of humanity, all give a big hug, and we all get along great. So sweet and nice. Adam Smith thought you were greedy, selfish, and didn't give a rat's butt about anybody but yourself. Okay, let's figure out who's right. Maybe, I mean, the answer probably is somewhere in between, but my hunch is it sides more on Smith's side, and let's test that. And here's how we would know that. One of the problems with Marx's system and why it doesn't work, it removes one really important building block of Smith's system that is part of competition, okay? And that is this. It is the concept of personal incentive. Marx thought you could subsume your personal incentives to the greater whole. Smith thought that rarely, if ever, happened, that your personal motives always took precedent. And let's see if that's right. I mean, why are you here? Why are you in college? Are you in here for someone else? Are you in here because you thought you would become a better citizen and you would contribute to the greater good of America and humanity? No. You're here because there's something in for you. You wish a better job so you can get more money, so you can get the things you want in life. You are selfish, greedy, and only interested in yourself. And Adam Smith thought that was just fine. But that also gives you, because you're greedy and selfish, an incentive to work hard to do what is necessary to get that stuff. What happens when you remove that? Because in a command system, you kind of remove the incentive. Especially with that answer to the third question, for whom to produce? What do you mean I don't get to keep the profit? What do you mean I got to distribute it to all the lazy people? And that was because Smith's system was efficient. There is an incentive because there's a huge incentive in a market-driven economy. You don't produce, you don't get money, and you don't get money. Trust me, your family doesn't eat. And if you're lazy, Adam Smith, in the Wealth of Nations, will spell out what you should do. You should die. You should get out of the system. In fact, you can take your whole genetically lazy family and that gene pool and get it out. Just die out, please. It is a hard world. It is a tough world. It is a world for efficient, hard-working producers. You either work your butt off, or we got nothing for you. So there is an incentive in here to work, because there is a dire alternative if you don't. In a command system, that's not going to happen. We'll take care of you somehow, some way. So let's see which system might work better. Like, one of the great challenges is after the Second World War, half the world divides up into basically market/capitalist economy, command communist economy. So you have half the world in one, half the world in the other. And because both systems hate each other so much and are mutually almost exclusive to each other economic systems, neither system can stand the existence of the other. So one of them probably needs to be proven wrong and to go away. Now, how that plays out is a really fascinating economic, historical, and if you ever take me for one of the contemporary history classes, I'll give you a nice long lecture on really the roots of what happens to the command economies and those systems and why they faded away. But in short, the lack of incentive was critical to the failure of Marx's vision of the command economy for this reason. Once again, incentive's critical. Let's say I ran this classroom like a market classroom, okay? Let's say there's 10 of us in here. There's going to be 2 A's, 2 B's, 2 C's, 2 D's, 2 F's. Let's compete for them, guys. Now, assuming you want the A, most of you do, how hard will you work in this class to get those couple A's? Well, most of you are probably working pretty hard. Now, a lot of you aren't going to get the A. But overall, what's the quality of work like in the classroom? Well, it's a whirlwind of activity, isn't it? You're competing with each other. Oh, call on me, call on me. Read my paper next, read my paper next. No, he's wrong. You have that kind of competition. But the overall quality is fantastic. That's a competitive classroom. Okay? Now, on the other hand, what if I ran a command classroom? Now, the command economy, because we don't want that unequal distribution of wealth, is going to assume that all of us are the same. We're all equal. So, because I don't want to put anybody above anybody, and I want to single people out, I don't want any Andrew Carnegies running around in this classroom, we're all going to get the same grade. I don't even know what that grade is, but it's going to be the same. Might be an A, might be an F, I don't know. But we're all getting the same, because we're all in it together. Now, if you know that nothing you do will in any meaningful way dramatically increase or decrease the likelihood of an outcome you desire, which is a good grade. Remember, in that market classroom, you'd show up every day, you'd participate in class, and you'd work your butt off. In the command classroom, would you even show up? I wouldn't, because there's no incentive. So, how efficient, if we take that classroom metaphor, excuse me, and we apply it now to like a factory, in a steel mill in Pittsburgh, you are working your butt off in there. You work very, very hard because there is an incentive. You'll get fired if you don't, and there's also a big incentive too. You might get promoted if you get noticed. So because you are greedy, selfish, and self-motivated, it is in your interest to work hard in the factory, to either keep the job or move up. But both of those are equally valid, maybe, and you want both of those outcomes, or you don't want the fired outcome. In the command factory, you're probably not going to get fired, because we don't really do that, and you're probably not going to get promoted, because that would mean the guy ahead of you would have to lose his job. So there's very little mobility within the organization. And again, you know, nothing you do, no hard work, or lack of hard work, is in any meaningful way going to impact whether or not you get fired or get promoted. How hard do you work there? Right? You don't work very hard at all. So, in essence, market economies are mean, cruel, nasty little things. But they're efficient. Command economies simply aren't. So what happens after World War II is this fascinating dynamic emerges between the market economies and the command economies. And in essence, what plays out, one of the underpinnings of what comes to be known as the Cold War, is this fascinating idea that the United States has as to how to, in time, win the Cold War. Like, normally, if we want a country or a system or a people to go away, what do? Well, we fight them. And then they go away. But the one drawback to fighting the command economies is we got nuclear missiles, they got nuclear missiles, we shoot our missiles at them, they shoot their missiles at us, planet obliterated, hard to keep score. So that ain't going to work. But we do fight them. But not directly with weapons. What we fight them with, in essence, is the firm conviction and belief that our economic system is superior to yours. And here's how that plays out. The heart of the Cold War really is the arms race. So think about this dynamic. If the United States builds 1,000 nuclear missiles, what must the Russians do? Right, they got to build 1,000 missiles. We build 500 tanks, they build 500 tanks, etc., etc. But here's the kicker. See, we have an efficient system. We can build the tanks, the bombs, the missiles, and the guns. But we can also make blue jeans, and computer games, and cars, and Pepsi Cola, and everything else under the sun, because we are efficient. The Soviets could make the missiles, and the guns, and the tanks. But your system's not efficient. You want to flip reason for the fall of the Soviet Union, they couldn't make blue jeans. The inefficiency of the Soviet, year after year, right? We spend more on defense, oh crap, they got to spend more. More and more and more. And then finally, Ronald Reagan becomes president. And Ronald Reagan gets a bad rap from a lot of people for being this Cold Warrior, warmonger type. And as you know, I knew Ronald Reagan, and nothing could be, nothing, but it was pretty far from the truth. And Reagan intuitively knew and understood it was pretty much time to end the game, that the Soviet economy was teetering on the point of utter collapse. And I think to a large degree, he put our chips on the table. He announces the United States has a plan to build this, what was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. Star Wars, everybody called it. These cool orbiting satellites that would shoot lasers and knock missiles down. The cost was astronomical, if indeed we even could have built it. So in essence, what he's done is what the Cold War is the greatest poker game in history, and it's an economic poker game, okay? And he pushes all our chips in. And the Soviet Union, the greatest threat to world peace and freedom the world has ever seen. They make Al-Qaeda look like Boy Scouts. The Soviet Union looked at their cards, looked at their chips, and collapsed at our feet without a shot being fired. But that is not entirely, but in large, it's an economic story. It is the story of an efficient system outdueling, in the end, an inefficient system. You can say what you want about capitalism and market economies. They're mean, they're cruel, they're nasty, blah, 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 blah. But they are efficient. Okay? So you have that. And so, in essence, one of the things that came out of that big national debt that everybody argues over, at the time that wasn't a huge issue for me. That's the price you paid for not fighting World War III. But we do learn something from the command economies. If I ask you on the test, what is the most economies, including the United States today, it is the fourth. It is called a mixed system. A mixed system tries to do the best of both worlds. It tries to keep the efficiency of the market economies and keep that working, right? But at the same time, provide some government involvement, oversight, regulation, some might say over-regulation, of the system to make sure it's not as mean and cruel as it was in the days of Carnegie Mellon, Rockefeller, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So those are the four economic systems that basically we have. The last real concept, I think, for week one, the system that we have today, the kind of a mixed economic system, operates on something referred to as the circular flow model. And you do need to be able to define and describe the circular flow model. The circular flow model discusses the relationship between individual households and businesses, okay? So you start here, a little house, and that'll represent individuals. And over here, we'll draw a little factory. Again, forgive my lousy drawing ability. Here's a factory. We'll call that business. Now, the nature of the relationship between them is this. Individuals start by providing to business the factors of production. That includes a number of things. Money, like investors to start up a business, all those resources. Maybe they sell them some land, they provide labor, they provide money, they provide entrepreneurship. All those resources, factors of production, come from people, individuals, that's how they start, right? And they go to a business. Now, a business, on the other hand, provides what? Then they take those factors of production and create goods and services, which then go back to individuals, right? And then there's an internal flow as well, in that the business, in return for the factors of production, provides wages, salaries, whatever, right? And then what does the consumer take the wages for? They take them and do consumer spending, right? So you start with individuals here who give land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship to a business. The business pays them money. The business provides them goods. And the consumer spends these wages on those goods. So in essence, everything keeps flowing in a somewhat circular fashion, and that today is kind of epitomizes how a consumer-driven economy, which is really what we have today, kind of operates. Now, that's primarily most of the lecture for week 1. Covered a lot of terms. What I'll do next is I'm going to have my last little video segment will be a discussion on things to know for the quiz, review for the quiz, and things to talk about in the discussion questions. Because again, ideally by Sunday at midnight of week 1, you should have the quiz completely done, and you should have all the discussion questions completed as well. But we'll talk more about that in our next segment. Thank you once again for listening to video segment number 2, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks again.